Hey guys, it's Jessica. Welcome to my channel. Today I am going to be talking about all of the books that disappointed me in 2024. So when I talk about disappointing books, I'm not talking about the books that I hated. I'm not talking about my 1 stars, 2 stars. That's not where we are with most of these. Most of these were in the 3-star range. But there was something about them that kept me from really being able to recommend them. And for the most part, they were books that I was really looking forward to something about, and they just did not work for me. And I think that's really instructive to know about the books that are hyped that maybe just didn't live up to that hype. So without any further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and get started, and we are gonna start with Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. This is the sequel to Divine Rivals, which was one of my top 10 books of 2023. So I was so excited for the sequel to come out. It came out at the very end of December last year. I bought it immediately. I read it right away. And I was just very meh about it. I felt that the setting of the first book that I loved, the historical wartime, we're in the trenches kind of setting, was really just lost in the second book entirely. We focused a lot on the gods in this story. This is the story of gods who are like meddling with people's lives a little bit, that are raising armies to fight each other in this world. And I thought that I wanted to know more about them, but it turned out I did not. Not if it meant that our two main characters, Iris and Roman, had to be separated from each other for most of the book. I mean, it was like 85% of the book. They didn't even talk. And I did not enjoy that, because the romance was the second thing that I really loved in Divine Rivals. And ultimately, this book, ultimately, I feel like Divine Rivals should have just been about 150 pages longer. I mean, it was a 300-page book. It could have been 500. Give me a 500-page book where we have the conflict, the cliffhanger that happens at the end of the first book, and just let it get resolved by the end of that book, because there was not enough material in that book to justify a sequel. And I think that's why it was so disappointing, because it just felt like here's some stuff we had to come up with to finally get to the end of their story that we were looking for all along. And man, it was so disappointing. It was so disappointing. And I gave it 3 stars. There was nothing wrong with it. Rebecca Ross is a great writer. Her writing is beautiful. She writes characters really well, but I did not enjoy this sequel, and I cannot recommend it. And I kind of have a hard time recommending Divine Rivals anymore, because it does end on a cliffhanger. And so I'm like, but you would have to read the second book, and the second book is just so disappointing. Okay, so we've done one book and I'm already upset. So this is gonna go well. Okay, so I have another one, and this is another one that I feel really bad for not loving this book more. And that book is Somewhere Beyond the Sea by T.J. Klune. This is the sequel to The House on the Cerulean Sea. It came out this year. The House on the Cerulean Sea is a story of an orphanage for magical children and kind of like non-human children. And the man who gets sent there, who falls in love with them, and it's very heartwarming. It's very sweet. It's very cute. It was a standalone for a long time, and this year we got a sequel, and I was very worried going into it that I didn't think this book needed a sequel, and so I was worried that it would just kind of feel like it didn't need to exist. And unfortunately, that is how I felt about it. I just didn't really find myself caring about it that much. It didn't feel like the stakes were that real. And it's kind of like, so I play a lot of video games, particularly Japanese RPGs, so JRPGs. And there is a thing that happens sometimes with JRPGs where there'll be a game and it'll be like fantastic. And then there'll be a sequel to the game released, reusing all the same assets and things, so they don't have to do that again. But all of a sudden, it's like all the characters just had their personalities turned up to 11, and it just feels very fan servicey. And I think that that's how I felt about this book. I felt like it was fan service, and I didn't feel like I was in a place where I needed that fan service from this title. It doesn't do anything to make me think poorly of the first book. I'm always going to recommend the first book, and I gave this book 3 stars. So it was fine. It was fine. But it didn't change my life the way that the first one felt like it did a little bit, and that was a disappointment. Okay, the next book I'm going to talk about is One that I've actually given a good rating to, and I've talked about quite a bit, but I still feel like I need to say that I do have some disappointments with The Sword of Kaigan by M.L. Wang. Now let me say first of all that M.L. Wang is so talented. I just read Blood Over Braidhaven, which is her newest book, earlier this year, and I loved it so much. I would highly recommend that. And I would recommend this book too, but there are a couple things. The first one is the way that she does world building, kind of like the info dumping part of the world where we explain how it works and how the magic works and what the geography is like. And she does it in a literal lesson in a classroom. And that just felt so like on the nose to me that I kind of was like, I mean, it is a standalone, so maybe we're just getting all that right now because she's like, well, let's get that out of the way and get to the good stuff. So, okay, so we're going to move on. And we're going to go to my second issue with this book, which is the pacing of it. The first half of the book was so good. And it built to this climax that happens at right about 55%, maybe 60% of the way through. But the problem is the climax of the book happens at 60% of the way through. And then there's a lot of stuff that happens after that. And I emotionally felt like I was so done after that happened that I wanted it to come down, and it didn't. And it didn't feel like a standard kind of story arc. And I just really struggled with it. There's also some stuff at the end of the book where she does some like callbacks to other series that she's written, which made it feel like there might be a sequel to this book, or it was just confusing, basically. Like, why are these people here and why am I supposed to know who they are and what's going on? And that part didn't work for me. Now, I will absolutely recommend this book, but also I would recommend her other book, the new one, Blood Over Brighthaven. I would recommend that so much more highly than I would recommend this, because a lot of the issues that I talk about here, the pacing in that book's amazing. She still does a little bit of the weird info dumping, but I decided that I could deal with that just because it's such a great book. But yeah, this one was a little bit disappointing for me, even though I did end up giving it 4 stars. And we have another book that came out this year, and that is The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Catherine Arden. I gave it 3 stars. Again, this should have been like such a slam dunk of a book for me because it's set in World War I. It's got ghosts. It is spooky. There's like, I don't know, it should have just been perfect for me. I love historical fantasy. But the problem, I think, with this book for me was that I didn't care about any of the fantastical parts, like at all. She did such a great job writing about the war, writing about the experience of the main character who was a nurse in the trenches during World War I, and then we go back to the front lines and we get to see all the terrible things that are happening. And the problem is that that was so terrible that whenever we went back to this like fantastical land, which I'm not going to explain because I don't want to spoil it, I couldn't care. I was like, we need to go back to this war because bad things are happening, you know? And so for that reason, it didn't work for me, but I still think it's a good book. And I definitely really want to try to read her series that starts with The Bear and the Nightingale. I can't remember what the series is called. I think that looks fantastic. And I loved her writing. This was my first Catherine Arden book. So I think this one just didn't work for me. I think it's like a personal issue and you might love it. Okay, then we have a kind of like a Booktube Book Talk darling book, and that is going to be Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. I gave it 3 stars, and I didn't love a lot of things about this book. This is the story of Bree, a young girl, I think she's 17, who goes to do a summer program on the campus of UNC Chapel Hill. And she finds out that there's, you know, magic going on and that the Knights of the Round Table are real. There's a lot of Arthurian legend stuff in this, and that stuff was so cool. I wanted to know so much more about that. But unfortunately, this is a young adult book, and it was very clear to me early on that we were getting a love triangle situation, and I cannot do love triangles anymore at this point in my life, especially not when one of the people in the love triangle is like the nicest guy ever, and the other one is this super toxic bad boy, and we're supposed to be like, I don't know, which one should she choose? No. I know that I'm an old person, but you should choose the nice guy. You don't want that other guy. That's bad news. And that's how I felt. And so I was so focused on that. I don't think I'm going to continue the series. I only read the first book, but I think if that doesn't bother you, it's great and you should definitely read it. I have another disappointing fantasy read, and that's going to be The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I gave this book 4 stars, but the problem is that I basically never ever think about it now. It is as though it has been removed from my brain, and I love Leigh Bardugo. Some of her books, like Six of Crows is so fantastic. I love Ninth House. I love all that stuff. Those are such great books. And I don't know, this is a historical fantasy, which is a little bit different for her. But I just felt like it was a little bit boring, maybe, and not enough happened. I mean, I think it was fine. I think it was fine, and I own it because that edition is so pretty. But it didn't change my life in the way that I was really hoping it would. There's a lot of stuff in here, in this historical fantasy set in Spain, that I thought was going to go somewhere that didn't go somewhere. And it was just really frustrating. I know a lot of other people have had a similar experience with this book, which doesn't mean I'm not recommending it. It just means that be aware that it is much slower and very different from her other books. Now I have a Becky Chambers book, and that book is a long way to a small angry planet. So I didn't like this book. And it should have been just made for me. It's sci-fi, it's cozy sci-fi, it's funny. It's supposed to be kind of like the TV show Firefly, which I love. But I found that I didn't care about any of the characters. I just didn't care about any of the characters. And the stakes in the book were so low that they just solved everything so easily. I never felt like there was any real tension or any chance that things weren't going to come out okay, which I find with me and things that are cozy, that's kind of a line for me. Like, I love cozy. I love a found family. I want to feel warm and happy at the end, but I also want to worry about them in the middle. And if it's just nice the whole time, that's not doing it for me. So this one, I mean, a lot of people love it, and I know it's probably just a me thing that I could not get into it, but I just could not. We have The Ballad of Never After, which is the second book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. So this book was basically fine. I gave it 3 stars. I read it in like less than a day, but I thought it was so ridiculous. I thought it was so crazy, and I didn't understand. Like, the first book is also kind of ridiculous, but it's cute and it's fun. But this book was like so over the top, and the main character in this book if there is a wrong decision, she's going to make that wrong decision every single time. She's never going to choose to do the thing that would make her life easier. And so for that reason, among others, I probably don't really recommend this series that much, although I haven't read the 3rd book, and I am going to be reading it this year. Hopefully, maybe. We'll see. You can tell I don't feel super enthused, so maybe I'm not going to read it. Maybe I'm just going to say that's it, I'm done. But I did give it 3 stars because, as I said, I read it in less than a day, so I obviously was invested. All right, I have 2 more disappointing books from this year. The first one is going to be Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. I am like a huge Ali Hazelwood fan. I love all of her STEM mysteries. I love all of her STEM romances, and I think that she does such a good job of creating characters that are relatable, kind of like to me personally. And this book is a young adult romance, and it is primarily about competitive chess players. So if you really love chess, you're gonna be into this because there is so much chess in this book, like so much more than I was thinking there was gonna be. I thought, we're gonna need to know a little bit of chess, and I know how to play chess, but I don't care about chess. And that was a problem, I think, in this book because there was so much. And I also didn't feel that this book was really properly marketed as a young adult book. I really felt like there was no reason for it to be that. The characters are old enough to be out of school, and there is some content that I personally would not feel comfortable giving to a 13-year-old, but that's me. That may be just me, but I didn't think it was a young adult book. It didn't feel that way to me. And as a romance, it was kind of eh. And I gave it 3 stars because, again, it's Ali Hazelwood. There's always going to be stuff that you're going to love. I particularly loved her family, the main character's family, her sisters. It was so great. But a lot of stuff, eh. And finally, I have one more book from this year that was disappointing to me, and that is An Academy for Liars by Alexis Henderson. And this I gave, again, 3 stars. This is what I give books that I think are kind of eh. So this is a dark academia, and I like dark academia, and I can accept that in dark academia, all of the characters are not necessarily going to be likable because that's just a thing, and that's fine. But in this book, I didn't like anybody. I especially didn't like our main character, who just got worse and worse and kept making more and more bad decisions and was so frustrating. Yeah. And I didn't feel like the book really knew if it was going to be a fantasy or a horror book or just a straight up dark academia sometimes, it felt like. And the ending was very unsatisfying to me, and kind of the whole book. And there's also a love story that I thought was kind of icky, that it was a power dynamic, age difference, romance that I did not approve of. And yeah, that one, it was just very It was very like, I wouldn't recommend it, but you know, a lot of people seem to have liked it fairly well. It's got kind of mixed reviews, I would say. So it's not maybe the most popular one. Okay, so there you have my most disappointing reads of the year. Again, these are not books that I hated. These are books that I just thought were disappointing for various reasons, mostly because I was looking forward to them and they didn't meet my expectations. Please leave in the comments a book from this year that you read that you found really disappointing. And I would love to hear about it and talk about it, especially if I've read it. I hope that you all have a fantastic day. I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye.